voice of women in sport.
Hi, and thanks for downloading the Amazon show here on Wisp Sports. I'm Chris Stafford, and at Wisp Sports, we believe women in sport deserve equal coverage. Our guest on this episode is British long-distance swimmer Beth French, who has broken multiple records around the world's oceans, and now, in her early 40s, she's found peace in those achievements and in her personal journey. She's now channeling her adventurous spirit with her 11-year-old son Dylan in remote areas of the world. And it's been quite a journey. Beth's story takes her from being wheelchair-bound due to ME from the age of 10 to 17, and then finding her feet again when she took her life in both hands to regain her strength through travelling and studying natural health around the world. Immersing herself in water was at first therapy and later became a physical and emotional challenge. Beth set about breaking long-distance swimming records, including the Molokai Channel, which took 24 hours and 10 minutes. Beth has also swum the English Channel, and from Cornwall to the Isles of Scilly, the Catalina Channel, as well as the Straits of Gibraltar. She's the subject of a new documentary, Against the Tides, and is also featured in a new book, Fantastic Female Adventures, by Lily Dyu. Beth, hi, thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me.
Tell us a little bit about where you are in the world right now, Beth, and how long you are at home, because it seems to me you travel a great deal to do what you do.
Yes, I'm in southwest England. I'm in Somerset. I was born and raised in West Somerset in a little farm where you couldn't see another house. So I grew up very much kind of roaming the hills and finding rivers and streams to jump in and riding my horse all over the place. And I spent a lot of my late teens and early 20s traveling around the world, falling in love with adventure. And it kind of gave me a bug to find reasons to adventure. And swimming certainly gave me that. I've always swum, never competitively, but I love exploring the watery world as well as your mind and body when you're face down in the water.
So your parents realised then, for when you were a young age, that they'd got a handful with you. What did they think to you taking off to do these adventures?
Well, they didn't have much choice. I went away for a 2-week holiday and came back 8 years later when I was 18. So they kind of held on to the end of the reins and hoped for the best, I think. But it had come after 7 years of illness. So I got ill when I was 10 with a kind of an unknown malaise, and I was just completely fatigued. And from a very, very active kid to suddenly wake up one day and not be able to sit up, not be able to brush my own hair, it was terrifying. And it kind of went in peaks and troughs, and I wasn't diagnosed until 7 years later when I was actually wheelchair bound, when I was diagnosed with having ME, chronic fatigue syndrome. And it was terrifying because there I was in a wheelchair being told that I may never get better. This may be it for the rest of my life. And it was truly terrifying. And that was my big rebellion in my teenage years, to fight back and to not give in to my diagnosis.
Well, with that degree of debilitation, though, at a young age, Beth, how come it was not diagnosed sooner?
Unfortunately, back then, so I might have 3 months where I'd be bedridden, and then I would wake up one day and I could walk and I could, and because I'd been incapacitated, I would sort of overcompensate. And so I was the captain of every sports team at school and sort of overachieving and pushing myself as much as I could, because there wasn't an answer to why I felt ill. And, blood tests came back inconclusive. And I had a variety of prognoses from doctors saying that I was a typical adolescent that liked to lie around on the sofa, that it was possibly swinging the lead where, my immune system was a little bit active. So back then, it was very underdiagnosed, and unfortunately, ME and chronic fatigue is still horrifically misunderstood, misrepresented, and underdiagnosed.
So you did bounce back, literally, and getting into activities in a way that I'm curious that transition though to get yourself out of a wheelchair and overcome that must have been quite the biggest climb of your life, I'd imagine.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, so the slope down into the wheelchair was very confusing and very damaging. I mean, you imagine I was 10, starting to go to, big school, grown-up school, high school, and my body changing, going through puberty, and then having these complete crashes where it'd be an immune crash or it'd be a complete fatigue. I would be in pain almost every day, whether I had energy or not. And when I didn't have energy, I was completely listless and couldn't even construct a sentence. So it was incredibly damaging to my sense of self. And by the time I was 17, I was riddled with mental health issues. I've battled with body dysmorphia my entire life because I felt trapped in my body. I felt stuck and I hated my body because it lied to me. It failed me. I literally wanted to be out of my skin. I hated the skin that I was in. It was a really messy journey to try and find health. And that was where I started, was to study different forms of health. And I ended up piecing together bits of health and wellness where I could go and learn about the immune system, learn about the stress reactions in the body. And I ended up, when I went abroad, I studied indigenous healthcare systems around the world, which had different answers to unknown illnesses. And so I learned different ways that I could explain to myself how to be healthy. And it was very much a personal quest to learn how to drive my body better. And so activity and natural health were one and the same thing. And that included living in Hawaii and studying with indigenous leaders over there. And I ended up being a Buddhist monk in Thailand for a year. So I studied intensive forms of meditation to really get to grips with the mind-body connection and the stress response in the body. And it was all just to learn how to not be ill.
But take us back a step, Beth. How did you get out of the wheelchair so that you were strong enough to travel?
It's really difficult to say, and I wish I had an answer for people who were still suffering that badly. As inconclusively and unknown as how I got into the wheelchair, I was able to walk one day and stagger, maybe only 3 or 4 paces and then collapse. And the fury and frustration made me push again the next day. Having had complete lack of drive and complete lack of ability to even will myself to walk for almost a year at that stage, to stagger for the first few steps gave me hope. And then collapsing gave me the fury to want to do it again. And yes, I slept for 22 hours, but when I woke up, I made myself fall out of bed, and I was crawling some days and some days I was walking. But it was almost learning the signposts of which kind of stress tired me and which kind of stress gave me energy. And they are very, very different for different people. So for some people, physical activity is an absolute trigger. I'm very lucky in that physical activity in and of itself is not a trigger for me. It actually helps me process the stress chemicals that I don't seem to be able to metabolize, which exhaust me. So if I'm well, I need to be active. When I'm ill and I can't be active, I get worse. And so to start with, it was just piecing together these moments of calm where I could be active. And it might be 5 minutes a day some days, and I might be able to do 2 or 3 days in a row and then not for a week. And then I could do 5 or 6 days a row and then not for 3 days. And it was completely peaks and troughs, and it just started to face up instead of facing down. And I wish I could explain what it was that did it. But for me, it was learning to understand the kind of stresses that damaged me.
So from the time you actually started that process of leaving the wheelchair behind, Beth, until you were actually able to get to an airport, get on a flight and face, international travel, how long do you think that transition was?
2 or 3 years. But even when I managed to travel, I wasn't well all of the time. So I still had little collapses, but they weren't as prolonged. And I tell you what, when you're lying in a bed in Hawaii looking at the sea is much nicer than when you're looking out at a January blustery, windy, wet day in England. So even though I was ill when I was abroad, I felt better about it. I didn't feel like I was suffering in the same way.
But obviously, during your young adolescence, you weren't able to work, clearly. I mean, and what happened with schooling then, and your education at that point, those critical years?
Absolutely. I managed to scrape through my GCSEs at 16, and I got partway through college to do my A-levels when I had to stop because I was in the wheelchair, and I tried to go back the following year, and it just kept triggering me. So I had to walk away from mainstream education. So when I started to study health, that was what I used. And because it made sense to me, because it was something that I could immediately apply and was relevant to my life, it kind of went in and stuck. And so that is what I do now for a living. I collected all the kind of therapies that I studied around the world, all the things that worked for me. And now I practice them, and people come, and I work with people with pain management, with rehab, with injuries, with long-term conditions that doctors don't really know what to do with. And I don't diagnose, but I work with people to help them manage their symptoms.
Yeah, I can imagine how you would embrace that because you identified with it so readily. But I'm curious now as to how you got to the point you were strong enough and motivated to get in the pool and start this incredible journey swimming. How did that come about?
Well, I was a toddler who would take off their nappy and climb in a bucket if it had water in it. And when I was ill, the only thing that I could do that gave me solace, that actually took away the pain, was floating in water. And it didn't matter if it was a bath. And if I could, I would have my sister drape me over her back, carry me downstairs and outside. And we had a little Victorian pond in our garden that my dad got a friend's digger who dug it out, and we filled it up with stream water. And I could float in that. It was an oversized, basically it was a duck pond essentially, but a bit deeper. And I could float. And in the cool water, most people would say very cold water, but in the cool water, it seemed to calm my senses. It gave my joints reprieve. It gave my body sort of support. I felt nurtured and nourished and pain-free. And so the water became this complete place of solace for me. And when I could lie and float, occasionally I would wriggle. There was nothing even vaguely relating to swimming when I was at my illest. It was just floating, and the water was where I felt better. And so the water became where the world makes sense to me. It was where I could feel like myself, and the only place where I had my body back. So when I started to...
Aquatherapy at its best then?
Absolutely. My body was at its best in the water. So yeah, it became kind of natural to me that was something that I always turned to. Whenever I was traveling anywhere, I didn't feel like I'd arrived until I'd got in the water wherever I was.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? How therapeutic water is. And I can just imagine, to be that weightless environment for your body that was so traumatized and so weak, how therapeutic that would be. And so then how did you progress to it being something that you clearly became very good at and had something natural in your, in your swim, in your stroke, and your breathing? You told me before how extraordinary. So this was clearly meant to be this journey.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's amazing. So when I lived in Hawaii, I was there from when I was 19 to when I was 22. I lived just up the road from where Captain Cook landed, in this beautiful natural harbour bay. And pods of spinner dolphins would swim there. And I was studying at massage school down the road. And, at lunch hour, we would cross this little dirt track and get in the water. And there might be turtles or manta rays in the water. And, I ended up finding that I would spend 2 or 3 hours in the water without a break. And I would feel better when I got out than when I got in. And, there's a swimmer's saying that a day is always improved by a swim. And nobody ever regrets a swim. And it's true. It absolutely is that you always feel better on the other side of a swim, even on your worst day. You get in the water, and the sea is fantastic. It's living. It is alive. And the Pacific Ocean I fell in love with because it's like the earth is breathing. It is so big and so deep, and you have this monumental tug that even though you might be thinking you're swimming straight along the coast, you're actually moving 15 feet either way, just with this gentle lull. And that's on a calm day. It's so visceral that you can throw anything at the ocean emotionally. You can get in and you can completely throw your toys out the pram. You can have a little breakdown. You can cry. You can shout. You can laugh. And the water is just there, and the water doesn't care. The water will just accept you as you are. And it gave me that space to really learn to fall in love with my body. And I fell in love with what my body could do, which was a real turning point for me. And, so the water again was this place where I came to be. And yes, and the exploration of myself and my mind, and finding a place where my body and my mind actually worked together at the same time was like an epiphany. So yes, it became what I wanted to do more and more.
I could quite see that. It clearly was the right environment for your body, you both physically, mentally, emotionally. As you said, everything just came together for you. It must have been a wonderful experience, like just a hugely wonderful human experience, really, to have gone what you went through with your body and then to find that environment that gives you all of those things. How liberating is that?
Oh, it cannot. I don't think I could put it into words to describe. So, I mean, the only thing that I can think of. So, swimming the English Channel was the biggest thing on my bucket list when I was in the wheelchair. If I sold my soul, the things that I would do when I grew up. The English Channel was the first thing that I'd ever known that I wanted to do when I grew up. And of course, it was the last thing that I did on my bucket list because it's the biggest, scariest thing. And I thought you had to be a special kind of person. I thought you had to have Olympic parents. I thought you had to be rich. And when I turned 30 and decided that actually I needed to stop putting things in the way of me, I was being a chicken, really. I was afraid that I would get ill again. So when I found that I needed to test that to make sure that I knew that I wasn't going to be ill, I trained for 2 years. And I remember standing in the pitch black at 2:30 in the morning, just outside Dover. And you're facing 42 kilometres of the English Channel, which, is cold, and there's loads of ferries and tankers and jellyfish. And it's the middle of the night and you're in nothing but a swimming costume. And you're standing on this little beach in the pitch black. And I know that most people would sort of step away from that and, go and find a nice pub with lights on and friends and music. All I felt was release and gratitude and relief that I could pour myself into this inky black ocean and I was there, I'd done it. I felt nothing but that I'd already won because I'd made it. I'd proved to myself that I could hold my health together. I could drive my body through training and get to this stage. And it was nothing but a celebration. And so swimming for me has been this celebration and this testing of my boundaries and my barriers and exploring how far you can do and kind of filling in the missing bits on the map, if you like, of who I am and what I can do.
I just following you through that description, Beth, it's very emotional. I mean, I having overcome some challenges myself, I know how the release of that and finding that environment and, as you say, connecting with your body and trusting your body again, that it really does belong to you and you are as one and in the right place for,
Yes.
in every sense of the word, you're in the right place. It's hugely emotional. I can imagine there were many tears of just release when you were swimming just because of the contentment of being in that place.
It was, although there weren't tears because it's very hard to clear out your goggles when you're crying. But yeah, no, it was this amazing experience and it was incredibly cathartic. And, I remember walking up onto French soil and I remember actively thinking, this is what it feels like to be your own hero. And, I kind of imagined, being full of yourself as being very sort of peacock chested and puff chested and cockerel like. And it wasn't. It was this very subtle shift in me that meant that the buck stops here. I've got the reins to my future and it wasn't scary anymore. It was like, okay, yes, it is my choice. Yes, I was in the wheelchair and it wasn't my fault, but I had to claim responsibility for where I was at in order to move forwards. And I finally stopped kicking myself. And all of my swims have taught me so much about defining myself and not being emotionally afraid. Coming face to face with a tiger shark in the middle of the night in a channel was everybody else's fear and ended up not being mine. That's what I came to realize, that other people's fears and the projections you end up getting very confused about what you're supposed to feel and who you're supposed to be, and actually going through what everybody said would be the worst experience ever. I came out of it realizing I have no reason to ever be afraid of anything emotionally ever again. I can choose to like something or not, but I don't have to be afraid of it. And I can define myself and make choices that are so unpopular with everybody else. But if they're right with me, I'll make them with love and apologize if it upsets anybody, but it's what's right for me. And it's so liberating to get to that space in your life where, yeah, you are fully in charge and in control and feeling good about yourself.
Yeah, I totally get it, Beth. And I guess at that point then, once you started achieving these targets, it not only was it a distance achievement, I mean, in itself, the actual feat of what you did, but it was an achievement in so many other ways. So I can imagine that you did one and then you wanted to do another, and on it went. Did it make you competitive within yourself, or competitive to break records and be the first woman here or the first woman there or the first person or a record holder? What was your motivation? And I can imagine it did change. I mean, they did evolve, I should say, over time. So talk about how it did evolve when you look at what you've achieved now, the accolades that you've got to your name. How did that fit into your life's journey?
Sure. I mean, the instigator for me, swimming the English Channel and actually stopping putting it off, stop procrastinating. I was told that I couldn't have children in my 20s and ended up getting pregnant when I turned 30. And my little boy is autistic, and it's just he and I. And he was really the catalyst, because I felt I needed A, to test that I wasn't going to get ill again being a single mum, but B, to really put to the test what I wanted to teach him, about self-discipline, but about fulfilling your dreams and never being defined by other people and defined by your diagnoses and what other people think you should be capable of. So when I swam to France, it was addictive. I immediately wanted to do it again because I had learned so much about myself and felt so good. It was like 15 years of therapy in 15 hours. So I immediately wanted to do another one. And 4 months later, I did. And again, it taught me so much about the nuts and bolts of how to cope with life on land. And once I had swum 2 channels, I realized that I could do this channel swimming thing. And so the challenge of, is it possible for me to swim, say, to France, wasn't there anymore. But I hadn't felt like I'd reached my edges yet. And I hadn't found when I needed to stop. So I started to ask my friends, what do you think I should swim? And, somebody said, the Isles of Scilly. And I said, well, I don't know. People go on holidays and they swim between them. They went, no, swim to the Isles of Scilly. And I looked into it and it had never been done before. And I talked to sea kayakers because they were the only people that I knew that was similar-ish to a swimmer who had made it. And they were all kind of, oh, no, you'll never be able to do it because you're against the current and there's loads of reasons why you can't. And I researched and found that people had tried, all women, funnily enough, people had tried and actually come quite close. And I wanted to know why not. I wanted to know why people hadn't completed. And I didn't think it would take me just one try. I thought it would be something that I could work at, over years and figure out and learn the different waters, learn the times of tides. And actually, I managed it on my first time. So although it was a hugely triumphant moment to be the first person ever to swim that swim, it was also really discombobulating because I was expecting it to be almost impossible and so much harder. And yeah, so I was immediately looking for something else that was going to test me that last little bit. I guess I was looking for when I needed to stop, really.
What would be the longest swim that you've done then?
Longest in time is 24 hours and 10 minutes. The longest distance, if you take out of the account the tide and the current, I've done 32 miles.
Which of those swims of all that you've done now, Beth, are you most proud of, that means the most to you?
Oddly enough, the swim that means the most to me is the one that I got out of. I set myself after the Isles of Scilly the challenge to see if it was possible for me to swim all Ocean's 7 channels in a single year. Now, the Ocean's 7 is a list of channels that are the equivalent of mountaineering 7 summits. And they're kind of picked and listed from the different channels around the world, all sea crossings, that are basically designed to take a swimmer apart. And if you can complete all 7, you're kind of considered the all-round ultimate distance swimmer. And I'd swum a couple of them, so I knew that the channels weren't going to be anything that was unusual. But for me, it was about recovery. Could I recover? Could I keep my body recovering from one channel to the next, to do them one after another? And that was the drive for me. Again, it was kind of testing this ME theory of, how far could I push my life before I found ME again? And I found it. But that's beside the point. The swim that I chose to get out of was actually the record-breaking swim. A lady called Kim Chambers, who had swum 4 of these channels in a year.
Right. Yes, we know Kim. She's been on our show.
She's fantastic. So, yes, she swam 4 in a year. And when I'd spoken to her back in 2012 saying, I'd love to swim all Ocean 7 in a year, she went, oh, go for it. It's only 7 swims in a year. That's fine. It's only 7 days of swimming. We do that for fun, right? So she made it seem so easy. And I found that actually the swims were the easiest part of that process for me, because my little boy was now 8, and his awareness of himself and his awareness of his autism had grown. And although he loved adventure, the team that I had to have with me, he found a real challenge to have an immediate, close group of people in his face all the time. And it became detrimental to the both of us. So during the 5th swim, which would have been the one that I could have dined out on, I had an epiphany where I realized that, yes, I had completed my quest to see if I could recover. I could recover from one channel to the next and swim another one in 5 weeks' time. Yes, I could do that. So what was I doing, still doing this project? And I realized that I was doing it for other people, because I'd said, I want to see if I can do all 7 in the year. And all of a sudden people had said, right, that's a world record. And they were hanging their hopes on it. And I realized that actually I didn't want, that's not my drive. And I realized that my original goal was not my destination. I had actually reached the point of where I knew that I was in control, and I didn't have anything to prove anymore. And I didn't actively want to get to the other side anymore. For the first time in my life, I had reached my limit. And it wasn't a physical limit. I could have carried on swimming. I felt fine. I didn't hurt. My limit, exactly the same as it was with my ME, was actually an emotional one. And I needed to listen to myself. So I got out. And that's the swim that I'm most proud of. And it's the one that changed me in its entirety the most, because it really was me taking, in the face of everybody else, in the face of all the people who I care about, saying thank you so much, but actually I've got to go over here now. And it was this massive release and relief to hear my own voice. And it basically tied a complete circle in my ME journey, that I need never suffer like I used to, because I will always listen to myself now.
Yeah, you took control in a way that was right for you again at the right time. So both ends of that journey. So where are you with your ME now then, Beth?
So I still have some symptoms. Face to face with a tiger shark was very stressful, and so that triggered my immune system a little bit. So I have rumbling autoimmune dysfunctions that I managed to stay on top of, and I no longer suffer having days in bed. I have pajama days with my boy, so I take care of myself, and that kind of self-care thing that we tend to beat ourselves up when we're younger because we should be consistent energetically. I enjoy my downtime as well as the time that I'm feeling full of energy and full of vibrancy. So I swim when I want to, and rest when I need to.
And in terms of activities, then you can obviously pick what you want to do now, and without having these big goals for swimming a long distance. So what other activities do you enjoy? As I know you had told me that you did CrossFit specifically for the swimming, but do you do anything other than swimming now just by way of helping yourself to keep fit?
No, I swim for my mind and my communing with the water. My little boy wanted to learn to surf, so we surf now. We're going to have a scuba experience next week because that's what he wants to do next. We also, when I got back in Japan, out of the water, I went back to my little boy in the hotel, and I said, I've stopped swimming. I'm done. I'm going to be your mummy again. And I thinking he was going to be very proud of me, and he was quite disappointed because actually he loved the adventure. So I told him he could choose our next adventure, and without a break, he said, "Well, we're going to go and stay in a yurt in the snow in Alaska in the winter." So we did. We hiked into a glacial valley and stayed in a little public access yurt with nothing but a wood-burning stove and a platform, and had the best time. And so this summer we went up to Austria to a glacier that you can hike inside, and I had a swim inside a glacial tunnel 30 meters below the surface of the glacier. And I'm hoping to organise an expedition where I can go down to Antarctica with him, because he would love to go to Antarctica, and I'm going to swim in Antarctica.
What's his name?
Dylan.
Well, Dylan is going to be taking over from you when it comes to world adventures at some point. It sounds like you're going to make him ambitious.
One of the things that he finds difficult is being curious in the world. And I love the fact that instilling adventure in him, he's coming up with these ideas, and he is curious about the world, and he loves exploring, which is such a joy to have given him. So, yeah, absolutely. I'm loving having to keep up with him, it's really nice. He's now 11, so, I'm really having to keep up with him.
Absolutely. Well, it'll maybe take you places that you haven't been before, so what a wonderful journey. And you're still doing your health practitioning, are you? How do you describe that, Beth, for anyone that might be interested in contacting you?
Sure, absolutely. So I major in bodywork with functional kinetics, so looking at how you use your body and what you want to do with your body, whether it's sitting at an office or whether it's cycling from north to south tips of Africa, looking at how you use your body and then working with where your tensions are, whether it's with massage or exercises, to release that. And I also teach different forms of brain prioritizing, so meditations, breath work and things like that.
Well, it's been an interesting journey, to say the least, Beth, and obviously you've accomplished a great deal, and as you say, not just distances and times and swims and physical endeavour, but a lot more. I mean, as a whole person, you must have a sense of enormous satisfaction for the journey that you've taken so far, and more to come.
I'm loving life. I mean, there have been times where it has been low. But to be honest, I would not trade my ME experience with anybody. It has given me the joy of this quest, of this celebration of what my body can do. So yeah, much though I hated my body, I am so grateful that I was there and have come out of it. And yeah, anybody who's feeling in the depths of it at this moment, really find hope and find the moments where you have gaps in your pain or gaps in your downtime, because those are where you can grow. And yeah, growth is what life is all about. And it's been a ride.
For sure. And we should mention that you are the subject of a new book that was published on October 3rd, Fantastic Female Adventures, Truly Amazing Tales of Women Exploring the World. And that's by Lily Dyu. And that's available on Amazon as a paperback, also on Kindle as well. And that features a diverse range of women doing extraordinary things, big adventures, but great fun. That's a read I think for most ages, that is. So you can get that on Amazon. Beth, thank you very much for coming on the show and telling us about your journey. And I think there's so much more to come. So how do people follow you on social media and find out where you're going next?
Sure. I have my own website, bethfrench.co.uk, and Facebook and Instagram, Beth French Lives. And I'm so fortunate that actually my last project was made into a film, which is due to come to America. It's going to Austin, Texas Film Festival, and we should be there in the new year. So that will be very exciting.
Absolutely. So you are the subject of that film, Against the Tides.
I'm a subject of a documentary, yes, called Against the Tides.
Exciting stuff. All right. Well, best of luck with that. And thanks for taking the time to come on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for talking to me.
All sports, one voice, we coach. Tune in to the voice of women coaches on the We Coach podcast. This is Wisp Sports.
And if you'd like to find out more about Beth and follow her on social media, you'll find all of those links on our website at wissports.com. Just click on the Listen tab and look for the Amazon show. And whilst you're on the website, take a look around at all the other shows that we do here at Wisp Sports. There is something for everybody. We cover all sports for all women around the world. And if you have any ideas for guests or topics that you think we should be covering here at Wisp Sports, do drop us a line to info@wispsports.com. And we'd love for you to give us a review on iTunes when you have a moment, because that makes a big difference to where we rank in iTunes. And you can find us, of course, on any podcast app. And as always, we would love you to share what we do on your social media. Just follow us at Wisp Sports. Until the next time, thank you for listening and for helping us to turn up the volume on women's sports.